Hello and welcome friends. Today I am going to discuss the topic entitled Structure and Function of Heart, Cardiac Cycle, Basic Concepts of Electrocardiogram and Circulatory System. The cardiovascular system consists of three interrelated components: blood, the heart, and the blood vessels. In this chapter, we focus on the structure and functioning of human heart. We will also study the cardiac cycle and electrocardiogram. Besides, we will study the basic layout of circulatory system. Position and shape of heart. The heart is situated in the middle mediastinum behind the breastbone in the chest at the level of thoracic vertebrae T5 to T8. As heart is located in between the lungs, the left lung is smaller than the right lung and has a cardiac notch in its border to accommodate the heart. The heart is cone-shaped with its base positioned upwards and tapering down to the apex. An adult heart has a mass of 250 to 350 grams. The heart is typically the size of a fist. This muscular organ pumps blood in humans and other animals through the blood vessels of the circulatory system. Structure of heart wall. The heart is enclosed in a protective double membrane sac, the pericardium, which also contains a small amount of fluid. The heart wall is made up of three layers: the inner endocardium, middle myocardium, and outer epicardium. The innermost layer of the heart, called as endocardium, is made up of a lining of simple squamous epithelium and covers heart chambers and valves. It is continuous with the endothelium of the veins and arteries of the heart. The endocardium, by secreting endothelins, may also play a role in regulating the contraction of the myocardium. The middle layer of the heart wall is the myocardium, which is composed of cardiac muscles, a layer of involuntary striated muscle tissue surrounded by a framework of collagen. The myocardium is also supplied with blood vessels and nerve fibers by way of the epicardium that help to regulate the heart rate. Cardiac muscle shows autorhythmicity, that is, the unique ability to initiate a cardiac action potential at a fixed rate, spreading the impulse rapidly from cell to cell to trigger the contractions of the entire heart. This autorhythmicity is modulated by the endocrine and nervous systems. The pericardium surrounds the heart. It consists of two membranes, an inner serous membrane called the epicardium and an outer fibrous membrane. These enclose the pericardial cavity, which contains the pericardial fluid that lubricates the surface of the heart. Chambers of heart. The heart has four chambers. Two upper atria or auricles are the receiving chambers, and two lower ventricles are the discharging chambers. The atria are connected to the ventricles by the atrioventricular valves and separated from the ventricles by the coronary sulcus. The right atrium and the right ventricle are together referred to as right heart. Similarly, the left atrium and the left ventricle together are sometimes referred to as the left heart. The interatrial septum separates the atria and the interventricular septum separates the ventricles. The interventricular septum is much thicker than the interatrial septum, since the ventricles need to generate greater pressure when they are contracted. Valves of heart. The valves ensure unidirectional blood flow through the heart and prevents backflow. Between the right atrium and the right ventricle is the tricuspid valve. This consists of three cusps. Each of the three valve cusps is attached to several strands of connective tissue, the chordae tendineae, sometimes referred to as the heart strings. Between the left atrium and left ventricle is the mitral valve, also known as bicuspid valve due to its having two cusps. These cusps are also attached via chordae tendineae to two papillary muscles projecting from the ventricular wall. The tricuspid and the mitral valves are the atrioventricular valves. The semilunar pulmonary valve is located at the base of the pulmonary artery. This has three cusps. When the ventricle relaxes, this valve prevents the backward movement of blood into the right ventricle. The semilunar aortic valve is at the base of the aorta. This too has three cusps, which prevent the blood flowing backward from the aorta into the left ventricle. After understanding the position, structure, chambers and valves of human heart, let's now describe the right heart and the left heart. The right heart. The right heart includes right atrium and right ventricle. The two major systemic veins, the superior and inferior vena cava, and the collection of veins that make up the coronary sinus empty into the right atrium. The superior vena cava drains blood from above the diaphragm. The inferior vena cava drains the blood from below the diaphragm. Immediately above and to the middle of the opening of the inferior vena cava is the opening of the thin-walled coronary sinus. In the wall of the right atrium is an oval-shaped depression known as fossa ovalis. It is a remnant of an opening in the fetal heart known as the foramen ovale. The foramen ovale allowed blood in the fetal heart to pass directly from the right atrium to the left atrium, allowing some blood to bypass the pulmonary circuit. Within seconds after birth, a flap of tissue known as septum primum closes the foramen ovale and establishes the typical cardiac circulation pattern. The right atrium is connected to the right ventricle by the tricuspid valve. When the myocardium of the ventricle contracts, pressure within the ventricular chamber rises. Tricuspid valve prevents any potential backflow of blood from the contracting ventricle into the atrium. When the right ventricle contracts, it ejects blood into the pulmonary artery. At the base of the pulmonary artery is the pulmonary semilunar valve that prevents backflow of blood from the pulmonary artery into the left ventricle. The left heart. The left heart includes left auricle and left ventricle. After gaseous exchange in the pulmonary capillaries, blood high in oxygen returns to the left atrium via one of the four pulmonary veins. Blood flows nearly continuously from the pulmonary veins back into the left atrium, which acts as the receiving chamber, and from here through an opening into the left ventricle. Most blood flows passively into the heart while both the atria and ventricles are relaxed. But towards the end of the ventricular relaxation period, the left atrium will contract, pumping blood into the ventricle. The atrial contraction accounts for approximately 20% of ventricular filling. The left atrium is connected to the left ventricle by the mitral valve. Although both sides of the heart will pump the same amount of blood, the muscular layer is much thicker in the left ventricle compared to the right, due to the greater force needed here. The left ventricle is the major pumping chamber for the systemic circulation. It ejects blood into the aorta through the aortic semilunar valves. Let's now discuss the working of heart. The heart functions as a pump in the circulatory system to provide a continuous circulation of blood throughout the body. This circulation consists of the systemic circulation to and from the body and the pulmonary circulation to and from the lungs. Blood in the pulmonary circulation exchanges carbon dioxide for oxygen in the lungs through the process of respiration. The systemic circulation then transports oxygen to the body and returns carbon dioxide and relatively deoxygenated blood to the heart for transfer to the lungs. The right heart collects deoxygenated blood from two large veins, the superior and inferior vena cava. The blood collects in the right atrium and is pumped through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, where it's pumped into the pulmonary artery through the pulmonary valve. Here, the blood enters the pulmonary circulation where carbon dioxide can be exchanged for oxygen in the lungs. This happens through the passive process of diffusion. In the left heart, oxygenated blood is returned to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins. It is then pumped into the left ventricle through the mitral valve and into the aorta through the aortic valve for systemic circulation. The aorta is a large artery that branches into many smaller arteries, arterioles, and ultimately capillaries. In the capillaries, oxygen and nutrients from blood are supplied to body cells for metabolism, exchange for carbon dioxide, and waste products. The next component of today's module is cardiac cycle. Blood must continuously be moved around the body, collecting and supplying vital substances to cells as well as removing waste from them. The cardiac cycle refers to a complete heartbeat from its generation to the beginning of next beat, and so includes the diastole, the systole, and the intervening pause. The cycle takes place in the following sequence. Stage 1. Ventricular diastole and atrial systole. Both ventricles relax simultaneously. This results in lower pressure in each ventricle compared to each atrium above. Stage 2. Ventricular systole and atrial diastole. Both atria then relax. Both ventricles contract simultaneously. This results in high pressure in the ventricles compared to the atria above. Higher pressure in the ventricles compared to the aorta and pulmonary artery opens the semilunar valves and blood is ejected into these arteries. Stage 3. Ventricular diastole, atrial diastole. Immediately following ventricular systole, both ventricles and atria relax for a short time. Higher pressure in the aorta and pulmonary artery than in the ventricle closes the semilunar valves. This prevents the backflow of blood. Higher pressure in the vena cava and pulmonary vein than in the atria results in the refilling of the atria. The whole sequence above is one cardiac cycle or heartbeat, and it takes less than 1 second. The number of heartbeats per minute varies to suit the activity of an organism. Now, we will take on the third component of today's module, electrocardiogram. As action potentials propagate through the heart, they generate electric currents that can be detected at the surface of the body. An electrocardiogram, abbreviated as ECG, is a recording of these electric signals. The ECG is a composite record of action potentials produced by all the heart muscle fibers during each heartbeat. The instrument used to record the changes is an electrocardiograph. In clinical practice, electrodes are positioned on the arms and legs and at 6 positions on the chest to record the ECG. In a typical record, 3 clear recognizable waves appear with each heartbeat. The first, called the P wave, is a small upward deflection on the ECG. The P wave represents atrial depolarization, which separates from the SA node through contractile fibers in both atria. The second wave, called the Q or S complex, begins as a downward deflection, continues as a large, upward, triangular wave, and ends as a downward wave. The Q or S complex represents rapid ventricular depolarization as the action potential separates through ventricular contractile fibers. The third wave is dome-shaped upward deflection called the T wave. It indicates ventricular repolarization and occurs just as the ventricles are starting to relax. The T wave is smaller and wider than the QRS complex because repolarization occurs more slowly than depolarization. The final portion of today's module is the circulatory system. The cardiovascular system of humans is of closed type, meaning that the blood never leaves the network of blood vessels. The circulatory system is an organ system that permits blood to circulate and transport nutrients to the body tissues. The essential component of the human cardiovascular system are the heart, blood, and blood vessels. In this section, we shall study the 3 main types of blood vessels, namely arteries, capillaries, and veins. Arteries. Oxygenated blood enters the systemic circulation when leaving the left ventricle. The first part of the systemic circulation is the aorta, a massive and thick-walled artery. The aorta arches and branches into major arteries to supply blood to upper body before passing through the diaphragm. It then branches further into arteries which supply the lower parts of the body. Capillaries. Arteries branch into small passages called arterioles and then into the capillaries. The capillaries merge to bring blood into the venous system. Veins. After their passage through body tissues, capillaries merge once again into venules, which continue to merge into veins. The venous system finally forms 2 major veins, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. These 2 great vessels empty into the right atrium of the heart. Coronary circulation. The heart itself is supplied with oxygen and nutrients through a small loop of systemic circulation. The coronary circulation provides blood supply to heart muscles itself. The coronary circulation begins near the origin of the aorta by two arteries, the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. After nourishing the heart muscles, blood returns through the coronary veins into the coronary sinuses and from this into the right atrium. Backflow of blood through its opening during atrial systole is prevented by the Thebesian valve. Pulmonary circulation. The circulatory system of the lungs is the portion of the cardiovascular system in which oxygen-depleted blood is pumped away from the heart via the pulmonary artery. The blood is pumped to the lungs and returned oxygenated to the heart via the pulmonary vein. A separate system known as the bronchial circulation supplies blood to the tissues of large airways of the lungs. Systemic circulation. The systemic circulation is the circulation of the blood to all parts of the body except the lungs. Systemic circulation is the portion of the cardiovascular system which transports oxygenated blood away from the heart through the aorta from the left ventricle to the rest of the body and returns oxygen-depleted blood back to the heart. Cerebral circulation. The brain has a dual blood supply that comes from arteries at the front and back. These are called the anterior and posterior circulation respectively. The anterior circulation supplies the front of the brain, the posterior circulation supplies the back of the brain and brainstem. And finally, renal circulation. The renal circulation receives around 20% of the cardiac output. It is the blood supplied to the kidneys and contains many specialized blood vessels. With this, we conclude today's lecture, Structure and Function of Heart, Cardiac Cycle, Basic Concepts of Electrocardiogram and Circulatory System. Thank you.